Good afternoon, 6th grade students. We are continuing our read of Granted. Great book. Lots of fantasy in this book. We're on page 125, chapter 21. And this is when Ophelia is supposed to be retrieving a coin so that she can grant Kasara's wish. And it's turning out to be a little more difficult than she had anticipated because a man scooped the coin from the fountain where the wish was initially made by Kasara. And then he went to a restaurant, and he's been several places, and she needs to get this coin because it's part of her granting the wish. So here we are, page 125, chapter 21. The old man was already headed toward the door, but that didn't matter. Kasara's nickel sat in a pile of loose change by his empty cup, the waitress having been distracted momentarily by another customer. She had to act like now. Ophelia wrenched the slats of the vent open with both arms, her wings snapping free, sending her airborne after 3 steps. Hurling her toward the counter at a full-out charge, the coin silver halo beckoned, but she was the only one who saw it. Everyone else saw her, though. She made it impossible not to. Several customers pointed up toward the ceiling where she hovered. An elderly-looking lady in a fur coat screamed. A little boy cried out, "Birdie!" Ophelia couldn't worry about what they saw or thought they saw, so long as nobody shouted fairy or monster or what is that thing. She figured she was safe, protected by the camo. What mattered was the coin, grabbing it and getting out of here as fast as she could. Ophelia shot down from the ceiling and landed on the counter only a few inches away. Shoot! She saw the giant paw of a straw sweeping toward her just in time to duck out of its way. Swoosh! The head of the broom passed overhead, swung by the same waitress who tended to the old man. Ophelia recovered and made a lunge for the nickel when the broom came down again, smacking the counter this time. Slam, rattling forks on their plates and sending half the coins clattering to the floor. The other 2 humans sitting at the counter stood up and backed away. Another got up from his table and ran to the door, holding it open, shouting, "Sweep it outside!" Ophelia went airborne again. "Max, there's a crazy bird in the dining room," the waitress yelled behind her, taking another swipe at Ophelia, who had to shoot backward to avoid it. Ophelia gave the woman a dirty look, then spotted another man in blue jeans and a button-down striped shirt coming up behind her with a club of rolled-up newspaper in hand. Whoosh! Another near miss. Now she was dodging attacks on both sides, juking left and right, keeping one eye on the nickel and the other on whatever weapon was determined to knock her senseless, broom or newspaper, wielded by frantic, crazy humans shouting at one another. "Get it out of here! Don't hurt it! Here, give me the broom!" Ophelia rocketed back up to the ceiling, out of reach of the rolled up paper at least. She could still see the nickel on the counter several feet away. It would take her half a tick to perform the ritual, but it would take only a heartbeat for her to be swatted out of the sky. Time to go on the offensive. Ophelia bolted downward, right into the nest of brunette curls on top of the waitress's head, hoping she couldn't thwack what she couldn't see. But the man with the newspaper could, and he gave a good swing, missing Ophelia, who darted upward again, but delivering a solid smack across the waitress's noggin. "Hey, watch it!" "Sorry," the man said, reaching out for the waitress, only to have his own hand slapped away. In the moment of distraction, Ophelia went for the coin. Suddenly, a large man with a black beard and shrewd little eyes that reminded Ophelia of Barnabas Squint came bursting out of the kitchen with a strange red contraption in his hands, like a skinny red elephant with a black trunk. The trunk was pointing her way. This couldn't be good. A blast of white foam shot from its one giant nostril, dousing her in something like soap but thicker. Whatever it was, it stung her skin. Some of it got in her eyes, burning them. Ophelia fluttered backward away from the steady foam of white spray, rubbing at her eyes with her knuckles, clearing her vision just in time to see the broom again, but not in time to get out of its way. It smacked her head on, sent her tumbling backward, head over heels, right out the door. Humans, she thought, literally spitting flecks of white from her lips like some kind of rabid, half-crazed creature. Humans are to blame for everything. She sat in the dogwood tree and glared at the impenetrable fortress of Inner, guarded by a cadre of humans with brooms and newspapers and nozzled foam blasters. She couldn't go back in there. They were too well armed. Though part of her, the seething, cursing, nails digging in palms part, considered barging in with her fingers on both canisters of knockout spray just to teach them a lesson about how to treat all living things. Her eyes still blurred, and the specks of foam that had stuck to her face and hands had started to itch. There was a tear in her flight suit, and one button had come loose, dangling by a thread. She looked ruffled, scruffy even. She continued to curse everyone in the restaurant. Swatted and shot at, chased out the door. The behavior of those humans, and they just thought she was a bird. No wonder pigeons took pleasure in pooping on all their stuff. Humans. If it weren't for them, for their cities and their roads, for the cameras and their cars, for the insatiable need to explore everything, fairies wouldn't need to hole up in the haven. They wouldn't need to carefully regulate their use of magic. They wouldn't need a great tree or a grantor's code or even camouflage. Of course, if it weren't for them, there would be no wishes to begin with. It was a sticky situation, as sticky as the foam that clung to her once pink flight suit. Ophelia removed the acorn from its pocket and let her finger hover over the polished wooden button. Now, should she press it? The situation hadn't blown clear to the treetops yet. The coin was still contained. It was somewhere in that restaurant. Perhaps she'd been a little rash, bolting out of the vent like that into a crowd of people. She'd seen the coin and panicked. What happened to being meticulous? What happened to thinking things through? She'd been distracted by the boy and his family, that look on his face. She let herself get sucked into their conversation. Hadn't Charlie warned her about that? About keeping her focus? Don't lose sight of what's important, he said. The wish was what was important. It was the only thing that mattered. Ophelia needed to regroup. Just rest here a moment and come up with a better plan. And while she was resting, she might as well fix her button, which hung impertinently from one thread. She removed the spool of twine from a satchel and used her knife to fashion a makeshift needle from the stem of a dogwood leaf. It wasn't great, but she was no Arnold Rawleye. It would have to do. It was while she was sewing the loose button back on her uniform that she heard the bells on the diner's door ring out again and looked to see a man, the man in the denim pants and red and blue striped shirt who'd taken a swipe at her with his rolled paper club. Ophelia froze mid-stitch. She could hear Kasara's voice calling to her from the man's pocket. Her wish was on the move again. Thank the havens, Ophelia whispered, finally, something swinging her way besides brooms and newspapers. She stuffed the twine back in her satchel and stood up, forgetting to tie off her knot and letting the button come loose again as she took flight, quickly closing the distance between her and her target, keeping high and out of sight. Not that he would have noticed her. The man had his nose pressed to his little flashing electromajigger as he absent-mindedly turned the corner and started down the street. Ophelia hovered above him, her eyes fixed on his balding crown. An inviting target for an unhappy bird, she thought, waiting for the right moment. He crossed into a lot full of parked automobiles that appeared otherwise deserted. As good a place as any for an ambush. There'd be nobody around to see. He paused in front of a beat-up box of a car that looked older than he was, complete with dents and patches of rust. He opened the door with a creak. This was it. Ophelia unlatched a can of Rawleye spray. She'd take her shot, spray him right in the face, maybe a little payback for his attempts to thwack her back in the diner. He'd wake up a few hours later expecting his wallet to be gone or his car stolen, so relieved he would hardly miss the nickel from his pocket. Ophelia swooped down as the man lowered into his seat. The door still open. She was less than 20 feet away, a perfect shot. She squinched, one eye closed. It's for a good cause, she thought, repeating what Silas, the old fairy, had said to her before. She pressed the button. Nothing happened. She pressed again, jamming her thumb into it. Still nothing. The canister was busted. Its mechanism broken. Maybe it had gotten smacked too hard by the broom. Fia tossed the can aside with a hiss and tucked her body in tight, making herself into a dart, aimed at the door that was starting to shut way too fast, a fissure, then just a sliver, barely wide enough for her to slip through, maybe slam. Fia pulled up at the last second, nearly crashing into the man's window. She watched as he craned his neck to look out, wondering what had nearly smashed into his car, perhaps the same lunatic bird that had gotten caught in the diner. But Fia quickly hovered to the roof. The car growled to life after a spluttering of coughs, its back end belching dark clouds as it started to move. Fia circled above it, looking for another entry. She still had one can of sleepy spray left. Provided it worked, she would make Arnold's other eye roll if it didn't. But all the windows were closed, and there appeared to be no way to get to the man. She certainly wasn't about to crawl into the pipe that was hiccuping black smoke. Maybe her knife could cut a hole through the roof. But as soon as she thought it, she realized how foolish it was. The blade was strong and Fia stronger, but it was barely the length of a rose thorn. Forget it. If Fia couldn't get inside, she would have to get the man to come back out. The rattling white car pulled onto the street and sped up. Fia flew ahead 10 feet above, looking back over her shoulder to make sure it was right behind her. She knew she could at least get him to stop the car. She twisted and dove, heading straight for it, ramming speed. Fia did a half-flip and drop, fanning out her wings as wide as they would go, creating enough drag to slow her down, but also making herself appear as big as possible. It was a lesson she learned from studying gorillas and frilled lizards. The bigger, the scarier. She added a barbaric shout for effect. Aye! Apparently that wasn't scary enough. There was no telling what the man saw with the camo, but he didn't slam on the brakes as she'd hoped. And Fia smacked into the windshield, her face mashed, cheek to glass, one eye looking right at the man who was escaping with her wish. Now, at least, with her plastered to his car, the man would surely skid to a stop and scramble out the door, screaming, loose change spilling out of his pockets and onto the street for any passing ferry to just pick up. Instead, the man in the striped shirt got a weird look on his face and pulled a lever. Instead, a stream of blurring blue liquid struck Fia, soaking her suit and stinging her nostrils. She shielded her eyes this time, having learned from her confrontation at the Einer, but that only blinded her to the black metal arm that sprung from out of nowhere, thwacking her in the side, prying her loose from the glass. Half blind and spitting from whatever noxious poison the wheeled white turtle had assaulted her with, Fia hovered for a moment, heart thumping, the world a teary-eyed blur. She tried to keep focus on the car, knowing she had to give chase or risk losing the wish, which simply could not happen, which meant she didn't see the truck coming at her the other way. All right, stop there, and tomorrow we'll begin on page 135, chapter 23. Thanks so much, 6th grade students. Have a really good day and take care of yourselves. Bye.